here. Hello, everyone. Hello, Anthropology 123, Anthropology of Japan and China. Today, we're going to interview one of the authors of our book. Today I'm going to interview Professor Hongyan Yang. Is a PhD candidate in architecture in building landscapes, cultures, programs at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. She holds a BS in urban and rural planning and resource management, a BA in English, and an MA in human geography. Her undergraduate research and overseas studying and living experiences inspired her to look beyond the fundamental role of food and its significance in studying architectural history, ethnic culture, immigration history, and racial dynamics. Her interdisciplinary doctoral studies focuses on how culinary practices translate into space, in particular, how Asian immigrants' cooking traditions and cultural sensibilities invest new meanings to the built environments and cultural landscapes in the United States. She's the author of the chapter, Cooking in the Hmong Cultural Kitchen, in the Routledge Handbook of Food in Asia. So class, welcome our guest speaker. So you can't hear, but they're clapping for you. So Professor Yang, thank you so much for joining us today in our short little kind of interview. I thought it'd be fun for my students who are stuck at home to have a little something extra. So, they're home, they can't get out. So I thought, maybe they can listen to some interview. So I guess I have 5 short questions to ask you, and you could say anything you want. I guess the first one would be kind of maybe a little bit, what is your background? And I guess because the students don't know you, they've read your hopefully they've read your articles chapter, but we'd love to know your background. Like, how did you get in here?
My PhD is on in the field of architectural history. So in general, I'm more interested in the kind of the humanities scholarship on the buildings or landscape particular. And I had like my degree, I had a background in cultural geography, which is fundamentally an interest in the cultural landscape, including the building environment. But right now, I'm moving towards a more specific focus on architecture, like buildings in general. Yeah.
Oh, how fascinating! And I've never done this before, so I'm sharing the screen so the students can see you, right? So I'm gonna.
Probably, yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna take myself out of the screen. Is that? I hope that's okay. Okay, so
Sure.
It'll only show you, right? Is that okay? Okay, let me just
try. Up to you. Yeah.
All right. So hopefully this is working. That it's showing you. Okay, let's just pray that's doing this. Okay. Okay. So thank you. How interesting. That's very fascinating. My second question is, how did you kind of get involved in your kind of dissertation project? Was it some outgrowth of your like BA and MA, and was it the same or was it similar? Like, what was your path?
I think the major kind of turning point in my career is myself moving to the United States to pursuing my doctorate. And I think this kind of personal transnational studying experience really get me to understand how moving like actually change people's experience, and you carry ideas from overseas, culturally and social, like economically very different. And I think that kind of have a kind of personal inspiration on my work. I need to think about mobility. I need to think about immigrant experiences. And food plays a major role because I first started, cooking when I moved to the States because my parents are not around to help me cook anymore. And particularly in this project, I think is also kind of deeply connected to my passion with food. The one of the restaurant, the third one called the Toys Chinatown restaurant I discussed in the paper. I was in that restaurant and started looking at the restaurant. Oh, it doesn't look like. So today it's operated under a kind of a Thai immigrant family. But when I walked in, I said, oh, this is not Thai. This is the familiar Chinese architectural, kind of material elements that I'm familiar with. Then that kind of get me started. Oh, I need to look at the restaurant, look at those records, and to find what is actually the stories behind that restaurant. So I think my research and life were really very much intertwined, and most important, my interest in food.
Yes, that is so fascinating that you just went into a restaurant and you can actually see that it's has traditional Chinese elements. Oh, wow, interesting. So that actually gets me into my third question for you, which is like methods. Because how did you? Is it like your a geographical and English background? You're able to recognize. I mean, what are the methods that you use to kind of analyze and then I guess if I could just piggyback on the question number two, since you recognize there's Chinese elements, what was it in your background that what are Chinese elements, quote unquote? Because I think in America we have Panda Express, so like steam thing. So I think most people would not be able to recognize other than like a faux panda kind of architecture. What are these methods you use, and what did you recognize that was elements of Chinese architecture?
Um, because I grew up in the capital of China, Beijing. And what is really interesting about Chinese architecture in the United States is the Western architects actually chose to imitate the architecture that's really local to like the kind of the like the Forbidden City, that kind of pavilion, all those kind of palaces.
Oh, wow.
So that restaurant actually from the exterior, has that kind of like gate tower on the top, and also has that kind of moon gate, they call it in Chinese. It's like a circular gate. And also interior, they have lots of dragons, and those kind of red beans, and kind of the gold painted like kind of decorations, and really red, right? And it's like dragon, all those symbolic thing that really kind of clicked. Oh, this is something that I know from the palace at the Forbidden City, or the Summer Palace I grew up nearby, and knowing that. So yeah, it's kind of based on, I think sort of it's like luck and experience. And also like partially, I think that kind of stereotypes of Chinese architecture in the States were played really well. That's how I got to recognize it. Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. I can't believe it that you could just like recognize that. That's wow. So in terms of your methods, did you go and take pictures of this place? Did you go to archive? Like I know you had this background. You said you lived in Beijing, and so you recognize the palaces in Beijing. You see a similarity with this architecture. But how were you able to? Did you take pictures of this restaurant? And how do you know? How did you get to the back? Like your chapter is like really fascinating because it had like lots of pictures and lots of background. What did you do? Did you go owner, ask them questions, or how did you even get the information on this restaurant?
I did not get any direct information from the owners. What like partially I shared is, first of all, is like observation on the space itself, and then I first went to the public library. So in Milwaukee, or in any city or towns, there's usually public libraries. This is more like the important like archival like collections. And this restaurant was also really kind of maybe significant because the family was really prominent in Milwaukee, the Chinese American family. So they had records in the public library. So what I showed in the paper was sort of the tip of the iceberg, because there's also restaurant menus in that public library on the restaurants, which
Wow.
wasn't the focus of the paper. So, and Milwaukee also has another archive called the Milwaukee County Historical Society, which has two kind of collections on this family. And there's some photographs from that collection I was able to access. And also Milwaukee has a preservation commission that focus on historical buildings. And I got to be in touch with the senior preservationist. She showed me some kind of documents from her kind of previous research on local buildings, because that building is still standing today. It was built in the, I think the building was built in the 60s. And so they had records on that building too. In general, I also went to Madison. They have the State Historical Society, also has collections on the restaurant and the family. So I think the availability of the sources for this research they're kind of rich, and I was kind of lucky that I got to kind of find a case that is documented. Yeah.
That's wonderful, because there's like over 40,000 Chinese restaurants, and I'm pretty sure not of them, majority are not really famous. So I don't know how much information. So wow, that's like so wonderful. And you said that there's like more to your research, like menus. Oh, I would love to see that. Some kind of like menu change in time. So actually, that actually, answers my question a lot. And so, how your methods and it kind of answers like my fourth question, which is, how did you find your pictures? You just said it was through, I assume you took your own pictures, but also through the archive, public library. Wow. Okay. So I guess I'll skip to my fifth and last question. Doing your chapter, I really found it fascinating. I love the pictures and the great history. What did you like take away? Like, what did you find that was like, what's your thesis? What you take away from your chapter that you learned that you wanted to share? I mean, you mentioned that there's like lots of things that you found, like menus, all these other things that you didn't include. Like, what was your thesis? Like, why did you choose to share this, part of your chapter versus like other parts? Like you said, you didn't include the menus.
I think fundamentally, I believe the power of everyday mundane kind of artifacts, including the buildings, the menus, they're really important to reveal specific social mentalities and behavior of certain cultural groups. In this case, the restaurant owners, this particular immigrant family, Toy family, used the restaurant decorations and maybe the food they serve to communicate a certain kind of identity. And I think this is really, really kind of important because restaurant is really kind of the predominant occupation for a lot of the earlier immigrants. And many of them are lack of power. So I think through those kind of artifacts, reading those into buildings and food, we can start to see the voices of these people and what they're trying to demonstrate to the world, how they understand being an immigrant in the country. How should they position themselves to the world, to the white immigrant, to the kind of in that kind of anti-Chinese era? How could they kind of create an image for themselves, but also kind of that's negotiated through understanding of what is acceptable, but also what is desired, and what is really reflecting from what they're trying to show who they really are. And so I think that's really the thesis of my paper, just to show their kind of presented identity through those spaces and food. Yeah.
I love how you said that, how your answer, how they, in the midst of anti-Chinese sentiment, like what is desired and what's presented acceptable. That's so fascinating. Okay, well, thank you so much, Professor Yang. That was all my questions. I just had to throw away if there's anything you want to add at all about your project or your future projects that you want to do, or what else do you want other scholars to look at, like future research, like call out. I guess I'm out of questions, but if you want to add anything else that we can conclude with.
I think I really want to encourage every student, maybe scholars, to kind of start looking at things they're familiar with. The things that are happening every day, they're actually history, they're actually culture. And sometimes we kind of just overlooked because we're so used to those kind of facts. And I found that when I interview people, like the Hmong project, I did additional about their kind of domestic kitchen space. When I interviewed them, they didn't register that's actually a different culture because they live in that culture. So I want to kind of encourage everyone to think about what they take for granted might be something really valuable for other researchers, and they were able to share and kind of document in some way. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the answer. That I love that students can just look at their everyday mundane things, and they don't consider how it's so interesting and fascinating. And I'm glad you talked about your Hmong chapter, because I did give that to my other class. They loved it. And they were like really shocked that their everyday house, which they think is normal, but actually a lot of cultures don't do that type of family kind of kitchen kind of space. So wonderful. Thank you for saying that to my students. That's wonderful, because I think often we think of research as going abroad really far, but you can actually just do research in your own house. Right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Professor Yang, for your time. So I guess this concludes our interview. Stay safe. I'm going to turn off the button, but so
Okay.
thank you so much. Is there anything you
Thank
else?
you. I just want to thank you very much again for having me and to share my research and my some experience and understanding. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. I'm going to stop to share. And thank you so much, Professor Yang. Okay, I'm going to stop this. So, all right. Thank you so much.